The following review is my opinion. I encourage everyone to pick up the book and form your own. What I like, others may not, and vice versa. If you would like to review or critique my own work, I will leave a link in the description. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. I'm glad to have you all with me today. This review marks my channel reaching 1,000 subscribers, even though we're well past that at this point. I'm glad you could all join me for this little hobby of mine. Celebrations aside, today we're reviewing The Curse of the Star Wraiths by the Lord Otter. I've never reviewed a book by an aquatic mammal before, but there's a first time for everything. As usual, we'll start with a bit of the story, then on to my likes, my dislikes, and my thoughts. We start off with our two protagonists riding into the wild to visit their mother's grave. They are suddenly beset by a ferocious storm that knocks the youngest off his horse and dislocates his shoulder. It must have been a particularly awful storm, as it appears to have blown away the older brother as well. The younger brother now finds himself alone. We are told that he is much weaker than his older brother, who is tough and manly, nothing like Zulon, who we are currently following, that everyone agrees is weak and kinda sickly. Taking these feelings to heart, the younger brother stands up and slams his dislocated shoulder against the rocks to reset it. I suddenly have some serious questions about the judgment of everyone in this boy's village. He does scream in pain from it, so yeah, quit being such a baby. Susan down the street resets her dislocated shoulder 6 times a day. You don't hear her crying about it. Moving on from the standards of manhood, Zulin starts looking for his brother, when out from the storm walks a man. A man who's like 10 feet tall and looks like he eats nothing but protein. Some words are exchanged and the boy quickly forgets the encounter with the giant man who walked naked out of the storm. I feel like I should call someone, but I'm not sure who. We cut to an army coming across a scene of complete devastation. A storm appeared on the plains of Man, and it appears to have destroyed anything in the region that stood over a few inches tall, so this army was sent to investigate. If only they knew about the unconscious kid. Well, it turns out they kind of do. They bring a mage called an astromancer who can basically divine out what happened. Fortunately for the boys, he can't see their faces. But unlucky for the boys, he knows where they went. The army, given direction, heads off to the town. They're not there to protect the boy, a bit late in my opinion. They're here to find the sorcerer that has awoken, because that's the only thing that could have caused this, at least according to their intel. This army is very progressive. They're led by a capable female general, General Crest, who, upon reaching the town, demands they speak with this new magic man. The locals politely tell her to screw off. Then a little bit of violence happens. Convinced of his wrongdoing in opposing them, the local shaman surrenders himself, claiming to be the new sorcerer. The astromancer confirms it's him, and the shaman is swiftly executed. The general, being the smart, modern woman, informs the populace that now that they've gotten what they wanted, there's good news. They'll all be given new jobs. Mandatory new jobs. With a progressive pay scale that progresses from 0 to food. And all they have to do to seize this marvelous opportunity is survive the week-long forced march back to the city. Naturally, the locals are hesitant, so as part of the welcome package, the general sends her men to chastise them by beating them and slapping them in irons, including our protagonists. And with our protagonists off to their exciting new careers as contractually compelled individuals, we will leave off with our recap. So let's get into my likes. First of all, I want to compliment the magic system. Having the magical knowledge unlocked by the gods is a very nice touch. The fact that abusing it can lead to the displeasure of that god is also a nice balancing feature that leads to some flavor. The fact that abusing the magic, or displeasing the god, can lead to some terrible side effects is a nice balancing feature that I think gives flavor to the world. Not trying to spoil too much, all the magic is brought to this world by a god awakening the knowledge in a mortal. The magic system is fairly soft, and over the past few years I've kind of lost my liking for hard magic systems. Secondly, I have to applaud the author for making the second most unbalanced fantasy battle I've ever read, right behind the anime Gate, which pitted medieval armies against machine guns and artillery fire. It was funny in a dark way to see a small band of a few hundred mercenaries with swords and spears go up against nearly unkillable ghosts that suck the life out of you by touching you, and crystal-powered death lasers that immolate a few hundred yards at a time atop 500-foot walls. I love ridiculously unbalanced battles. And while I wasn't entirely convinced as to how this obstacle was overcome, I can believe it would work in some situations. It's not likely, but weapons are only as good as the people behind them. Next, I really like this book's use of demons. Normally in literature you only get two kinds of demons: the "we're actually misunderstood and therefore the good guys" kind, and the dark evil, completely unknowable mastermind kind. Here the demons are just demi-sentient killing machines. They thirst for blood and slaughter, and really don't care where they get it from, and they will lie, cheat, and steal to get it. It makes them feel alien and horrible, which is a refreshing change. Finally, the story keeps a good pace. It does have a few places where it drags, but not so much to stop you from reading. I appreciate we don't spend too long in any one spot, though that does raise a few concerns I'll get back to later. Not wanting to attack anyone, but it's nice to read a fantasy book that can't rival a New York Yellow Pages for page number. Probably would have finished it in one setting if not for my autistic need to take notes. So let's get into my dislikes. First, everything feels a bit too easy. The main characters don't feel like they've actually met any adversity. Don't get me wrong, I wouldn't want to go through what they did, and I'm certain it wouldn't turn out for me like it did for them. But that's part of the problem. Their success feels like it just happens. I don't feel the impact of their suffering. This may be due to the concise nature of the book. The book is very streamlined, and perhaps not as much time is spent on the struggles as needed. This leads me to my second dislike. I can't get a good feel for the characters. This is a common first-time author mistake. It may sound trite to say this, but there's a bit too much tell and not enough show. Stormbright and Steel, the names the boys choose for themselves, have a good hero story structure-wise, but I'm not feeling their struggle. They overcome everything, and while the book says it was hard, the resolution comes a bit too quick and what feels like a bit too easy. These boys were enslaved in very unfortunate conditions, but I just can't feel it. I need to hear about their hunger, the pain that never quite goes away from the overwork, the slight brain fog that comes from not getting enough sleep, or the restlessness that comes from months without seeing the sun. Writing is just as much about making us empathize with the characters as it is about telling a story. I want to empathize with the main characters, but I don't feel like the opportunity was there. Next, and this might just be me, but there's some saucy bits in the book, and they feel like they come out of nowhere. I'm going to combine this with the last of my dislikes, and that's the odd tone. When I started this book, I got a real 1990s young adult fantasy vibe, back before every YA book had to have a love scene. This is partially due to the fast pace and fairly quick resolutions. Then we get a prostrate naked woman, or two characters doing the horizontal hello, and it feels off. These bits of the book feel like they belong in a different story. There's nothing wrong with some adult stuff in fantasy, but these didn't really mesh with the rest of the story, and were some of the things that confused the tone. So let's get into my thoughts. First of all, I enjoyed the book. It made me laugh, kept me engaged, and I have to say I had no problems with the prose. There are a few word choices that stopped me, but none were so jarring that it took me out of the story. This book feels like classic YA or old school teen fiction. There's a lot of action, mysterious powers, and its pace and story are engaging. Most of the book has a fairly optimistic tone. I feel like the boys are greater than their troubles, and regardless of how bad things get, they'll never lose hope, much like the old school hero's journey. As mentioned before, there are a few places where this tone breaks, and we get into some darker and heavier things. These sections felt like they belonged in a different book. In a number of ways, this book reminds me of Malazan. The strange powers, nebulous gods, and strange humanoid factions with strange ideals paints a wide and vivid world. That being said, it doesn't have the mind-numbing complexity of Gardens of the Moon. The tighter focus helps keep the story in perspective. I would also like to mention the foreshadowing. So foreshadowing can play a major part in your books, but in this case, it feels like we shift perspectives for it. There are lines like, "They had no idea the part they'd play," sprinkled in with the prose, and I honestly feel like it weakened the book. Such lines take tension out of the story. Foreshadowing can be great for establishing a greater threat or hinting at an eventual weakness, but in this case it feels like the narrator is assuring us that things are going to be okay. Granted, the tone of the story also gives off this feeling, so it's not story-breaking, and it keeps this out of my dislikes. So here is my one and only spoiler thought. And it's the last of my thoughts, so feel free to progress no further if you don't want this minor spoiler. 3, 2, 1. There's a part in the later book where one of the brothers hooks up with the queen, and it just doesn't sit right. I get the whole teenage feelings, but again, it feels like it comes out of nowhere. This woman is a leader of a group of very foreign people to the main characters, and it should seem strange to her people that she's hooking up with this random teenage boy. This is a nitpick, but I feel like her people would have some serious problems with their young queen hooking up with what's basically a random outsider. Authority figures play a huge role in morale of a nation, especially those at war. Again, this is a personal nitpick, and it doesn't break the story. It just hit me the wrong way. Aside from that, this was a fun afternoon read, and I do recommend. Good luck, everyone.